is the Requiem Metal Podcast, episode 64, Entombed Left Hand Path. That was Left Hand Path, and we follow the Left Hand Path here on the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And what you just heard there was the samplings of the Phantasm soundtrack fading away.
Yes.
Into
they never
mist.
thought to ask for.
Yeah, or pay royalties for
Exactly.
or anything. So if you're unfamiliar with that tune, then that's slightly unfortunate, but that's why we're here to save the day, as we are going to be spotlighting a particular record of great importance in the world of extreme metal, and that would be
Entombed Left Hand Path. I think the song Left Hand Path is the quintessential Swedish death metal song, in my opinion.
Or even one could go so far as to say the quintessential continental death metal song, continental Europe death metal song.
Yeah, it was.
You take the UK and America and you put those together as like a scene, and then to me, this is like the European metal song of death metal.
And it came, for the most part, came out of nowhere, unless you were deep in the tape trading scene at the time.
Yeah.
And on Earache, which was kind of like the preeminent death metal label at the time, extreme metal label, and
that and Roadrunner were the two great.
Yeah, pair that with the video for it, which is pretty epic. If I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, I'm sure. But when we're used to this kind of like in your face, gore drenched stuff from the States, and then you see all these like black haired, really skinny guys in leather jackets by a huge cross.
Yeah.
And then like when it slows down toward the end with the Phantasm part,
they do like the cross superimposes, right?
Yeah, and then they zoom in on a head banging with superimposed the concert inside there, and the concert just looks like, wow, I've never seen anything like all these kids hanging off poles head banging and stuff.
And don't they do like a long pull away? It's been years since I've seen the video, but there's it's like slow motion parts of it.
And they've got
as they're sort of like,
and they're walking through a graveyard and stuff in that as well.
It's a cool video for low budget 1990.
Super low budget, but yeah, it's. That really kind of like made this aura around them that made them like unreal when I was younger.
And there's so many things about this song, and we'll get into the record here in a moment, but I mean, the opening scream ushers in it really is the era of the dominance of Swedish death metal. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, and if you read Decibel and you follow the logic of like one of our counterparts, Chris, and a lot of his articles, the three of us are very much entrenched in Swedish death metal. That almost informs how we approach a lot of the rest of the metal world in a weird way.
It was really our entry point to where we really went head over heels for this stuff.
And some people come out of like, say, the grind background into like the rest of metal, or they're like, they were Converge fans who discovered extreme metal or whatever. I feel like we were Earache fans. Anything that was on Earache that then developed into
outside of Old Lady Drivers, their first 10 or 15 releases were unbelievable, and it was all stuff plucked out of seemingly nowhere when you're a kid and you're not tape trading with people, going to the record store and seeing these long boxes of the Earache logo on them. We'd buy anything. Yeah,
and it was just an odd hodgepodge. It wasn't from, like you said, from one scene. Altars of Madness was from Florida. Scum from Birmingham, then Bolt Thrower,
Carcass, Force of Equilibrium, Cathedral.
It was just Godflesh. It was just a lot of different things coming from a lot of different angles.
And I don't know if any other label, at least like the Grind Crusher era, really had that kind of like, holy crap, this is like the blue note of extreme metal.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
Everything that was coming out was like an innovator in its field, its own genre-defining kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
I don't think there's a more... Earache from 1987 to 1991 or 92 is probably the greatest extreme metal label ever.
Yeah.
I don't think you could... Roadrunner.
I think as far as an all-encompassing umbrella label, sure. And then it starts getting niche to where Wrong Again Records
or Peaceful
those kind of like specific things. But
exactly,
Peaceful was more. I think they almost had some kind of almost agenda. I guess when they were coming, their stuff was more off kilter. I think a little bit more avant-garde or something. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas this stuff was straightforward, but yet every record that was coming out in on Earache was like you said, unique, and it was like reinventing something else. You know, it was all very extreme, and it all fit together in a weird way. I mean, it sounds strange to say that, but like when you got like the Grind Crusher tape, which was my first exposure to the really early Earache stuff, like my first Entombed stuff I ever heard was Wolverine Blues, you know, when that video was on MTV and all that kind of stuff. And then we stumbled upon a used Clandestine at the record store, which we didn't really care for at the time, which was weird. In hindsight, I love Clandestine, but you know, just goes to show you how like ignorant we were in like 9th grade. And then I found a Grind Crusher tape used, and for some reason, Morbid Angel to Godflesh to Bolt Thrower to Entombed to like I think Nocturnus was the other band that was on there.
Confessor.
All that stuff. Maybe not Confessor, but all the other stuff
Confessor
fit
actually
pretty well together.
But compared to the rest of it, this isn't extreme enough.
It fit, you know, pretty well. Well, I think actually on the Grind Crusher tape there was also the Harmony Corruption era Napalm tunes that were on there as well. Like
that must have been different from because the Grind Crusher CD was for the tour.
Okay, this was just a Grind Crusher compilation. I think it was like 2 or 3 songs from like 5 bands.
Okay, I think that was a little bit different.
Yeah,
though.
And that was like a great introduction to Street Cleaner and this and Altars of Madness and just every kind of dynamic great Earache record. But when it comes to Entombed and what they're known for, that's my cat doing crazy stuff. The 2 things that I think define the Swedish death metal sound or the Entombed sound in particular is sort of the Scott Carlson Autopsy sort of like plodding bass kind of sound and the sort of dirty Repulsion kind of like grind guitars kind of elements. That's the stuff that kind of comes to my mind, at least.
I think what Entombed did out differently than, say, Dismember or from Carnage or any of the kind of like first kind of run guys is they did the tremolo super fast picking stuff, but they let stuff breathe because letting the stuff breathe and using open notes with that guitar tone made it that much more epic. Because I'd never heard a guitar tone that was that like bludgeoning.
Warm. Yeah.
I mean, it was like
analog-y almost.
Yeah, you almost want it to like, let that note go a little bit longer. I just want to hear the sound of that guitar thing decay,
Yeah. It almost is like the same kind of sound. Probably the same way that you would have felt the first time you heard like some of the early Tony Iommi riffs, where it was like there was this resonating heaviness to like the early Black Sabbath riff that made you go, whoa, this is a lot more evil than Led Zeppelin. They're both hard rock, but like something's different about this. This is like creeping into me and rolling over me almost or something,
Well, and that's the thing that really got me into Entombed and death metal in general, was that I really felt something when I heard that guitar. I'm like, that really affects me physically when I hear the thing. And it was just over from there.
Well, and I think, too, the other thing that was interesting about these guys is, they're staring at death metal through a lot of different ways. They're staring at it from like a kind of a punk angle, garage rock, Stooges, MC5.
Nicky and Uffe were both in, kind of like crustish punk bands at that time, or pre-Nihilist.
Yeah, and then you take that and you throw in those American influences, the Autopsy, Repulsion, kind of, which those are 2 like recognized today as like awesome bands, but at the time they weren't.
They were super.
They weren't
underground.
Death. They weren't Morbid Angel. They weren't the traditional death metal, Possessed. They weren't those traditional sort of influences,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Entombed has some Slayerisms and stuff, and no one could escape kind of the influence of Slayer. But they also had these really like weird, clean parts as well. Like the soloing at the end of Left Hand Path is just like epic.
No other death metal band was. I mean, it's more. It's not like the Eddie Van Halen kind of Trey Zagazoth kind of really experimental wild stuff. It was more traditional, but you never heard that.
It was like
in extreme metal,
soulful.
Yeah, and it was like these guys can actually solo.
And I bet I don't know who gets exact songwriting credit, but I'm sure a lot of that tastefulness came probably out of Nicky.
Nicky, I think he was one of the major songwriters, but he also I reckon anybody that doesn't have this already, go out and pick up Precious Metal.
Yeah.
It's the Decibel Top 25 Hall of Fame records that are expanded from the original ones that were in the magazine. It
includes Left Hand Path.
It's like $12, but there's like a lot of like fantastic insight into that thing of behind the scenes stuff. And we'll eventually talk about a little bit on here as well, but it's just to see, I'd say about probably 80% of everything in the book is at least enthralling to me.
Sure.
To get inside these records that were like such a huge part of your youth and finally be able to like get behind them a little bit.
Yeah.
And none of them really destroy any of the aura around it.
Not at all. But what were you going to make reference to from that about Nicky and the songwriting?
Oh, that he did a lot of, as far as the leads, but he always accredited Uffe as being the most talented guy in the band.
Yeah.
And I think Uffe came from more, he had I think a wider range of influences outside of a lot of other people, and he'd been playing the longest, I believe. Mm-hmm. Alex was more raw, but
because Uffe came from Morbid, correct?
Yeah, he came from Morbid, and I think before that he was in a couple, I mean, all of them were like just, garage punk bands and stuff up to that point. And Alex was always kind of seen as, he was like the raw one, but he was able to play in like any other guys. He played some of the most
clean stuff, though, in a way. Whereas Uffe's guitar was the one that was maxed up to the mids and recorded.
And it was more emotive, I think. And he was playing more like by his gut, and I think Alex was kind of playing by the numbers to some degree, but he had a unique approach because I think he was so green.
So is this the Dave Murray, Adrian Smith kind of thing all over again?
Yeah, I think those kind of guitar dichotomies are really fantastic if you get them to stick right.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But really, Nicky, everybody knows he was kind of the brainchild of the band as far as writing and getting as far as the looks of the band. I think Alex was heavy into lyrical aspects and the visual kind of feel of everything as well.
And they really were they were a 4-piece for a long time. They didn't have a permanent bass player until Clandestine, correct? With Lars Rosenberg. Was he the first official bass player?
Yeah, because they actually got signed to Earache as they were still Nihilist.
Yep.
And they were, at the time, they were with Johnny Hellett, who went on to form Unleashed, and ended up, I don't know if they didn't, because there's no ill will between them.
He replaced Leaf on guitar. Leaf is the guy who was the original guitar player for Nihilist.
Who kind of came out.
He invented the Swedish Death Metal
the Boss metal pedal that you turn the mids all the way up on, which...
Everybody's heard the story. You can read about it in Choosing Death and Swedish Death Metal, and all those great books.
But apparently they kicked out Johnny for some reason. He was significantly older than everybody else. I don't think they really gelled very well as far as Johnny's more of a kind of an old school player.
He's a Celtic Frost kind of guy.
Totally, yeah. He's a Tom G. Warrior acolyte for sure. And they kicked him out. Throw the Entombed thing up. I think half the band had disbanded at that time too, and they kind of started pulling everyone back in. I think. Didn't Nicky and Uffe play bass on this record?
Yeah,
as well?
they traded songs. And I think in the interview in Precious Metals, they attribute which songs that each of them played bass and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
So it was kind of interesting because Nicky's a drummer who can write a lot of guitar parts and vocal melodies, and then he can also play some bass. If you want to know what his guitar skills sound like, just listen to the Helicopters stuff. I mean, the guy can flat out play guitar, and I think that's where some of that soulfulness that you hear in the soloing in Left Hand Path, for instance, comes through. That they're not trying to do Slayer, Morbid Angel, dive bombs all
shredding.
the time. Yeah, it's not like shredding. It's almost like.
It's like Sonic Smith kind of stuff sometimes.
For sure. It's city slang, coming over top of this heavily distorted Repulsion, Autopsy.
And I think
Celtic
maybe
Frost
that's what
mix.
makes the thing so engaging is there's something familiar in the solos, but there's something so foreign with the guitar sound and just a barrage of noise that's coming at you.
Yeah, and it's definitely a unique thing. And that tune, as we said, really just encapsulates, because of the opening scream, because of the really 3.5 minutes of sort of soloing at the end, over top of the Phantasm sort of keyboard sample that kind of adds a little mystery and
it's just it's the contemplative, it's the headbanging part, then there's the mosh part in the middle, and it's like everything that a song needs in it. I think it's one of the perfect songs.
It's almost like a prog rock death metal garage band song, which is all these oxymoronic
prog rock in the sense of
through the scope of a garage punk
band, a lot of stuff going on, but it's not overly technical or complicated. It all makes sense.
Yep. There's this flashy.
Throughout the record, there's this thing. The drums are kind of in opposition with the guitar, where the drums will be plodding on, but then the guitar will just be sliding around. A lot of, I think, which we talked about in the last, or I think it's probably a couple episodes of the Celestial Season.
Yeah.
The importance of open notes.
Yeah. And you don't hear that very often, you know, and the next tune that we're going to play, Drown, you know, is very mid-paced. It's not trying to blaze people over with speed, and that's that Autopsy influence where they're allowing themselves to go into these grooves, and they're accessing what Autopsy had done in the American scene by slowing everything down a little bit in the death metal stuff. Celtic Frost had kind of done that as well, but even Celtic Frost,
Autopsy, I think their influence was more Sabbath based, than say Celtic Frost based. But they were able to put in that almost like the grind elements with that kind of Sabbath, like, you know, hey, let's slow down and just groove out for a minute. You know, it's, I mean, Bay Area metal. What do you expect?
Yeah.
That's a bunch of stoners.
Yep. And then you throw on top of that the MC5 Stooges, Ramones, punk element, crass, you know, crust stuff.
And I think one of the biggest, probably unsung influences to Swedish death metal is crust.
Yeah,
crust or angro punk or whatever you want to call it. But just the, you know, the really repetitive, catchy,
kind of tune.
Those kind of riffs, and those are evident throughout this record and throughout like an Everflowing Stream and in Carnage, and it's everywhere.
Yeah,
and it's talked about by the bands, but it's not talked about by the people that are like journalists or people that are covering this stuff.
I know, it's weird.
It's kind of like frustrating.
And I mean, Entombed like really tried to make it obvious when they did like State of Emergency and Night of Vampires and just, you know, different things that were like, they're like, look, we're a lot more than just a death metal band, you know. And obviously, you know, if we go on and do another Entombed show besides just Left Hand Path, by the time you get to Wolverine Blues, it's very apparent that Entombed is bored by traditional death metal and is interested in moving on.
They actually, by that point, they'd been doing it for 3 or 4 years.
And I mean, it's hard to believe, but like they'd been recording a lot of these songs on Left Hand Path since '88. So they've been working on it for 2 or 3 years, chewing on them. I mean, they're kind of done by the time this record comes out in 1990. You know, I mean, they're thinking well beyond that. So, but we've got a quad of songs coming up, I think.
Yeah, we've got Drowned, Revel in Flesh, When Life Has Ceased, and Supposed to Rot.
Yeah, and so we'll talk a little bit about the uniqueness of some of these songs when we come back. So enjoy Drowned.
Dogs the body
All right, we're back with that was Supposed to Rot, a short but sweet little tune there, preceded by When Life Has Ceased, Revel in Flesh, and then we opened things up with the tune that I mentioned before, the break, Drowned. And one of the things about Drowned, just...
Is that even a real word?
Drowned?
Isn't it just drown?
Yeah, yeah, it's totally like, it's totally, so it's drown with an ED.
Like you drowned twice.
Drowned.
I don't think it's a real word, but
yeah,
it's cool.
Yeah, it's sweet. Swedish English, right? You know.
Well, yeah. If I tried to do anything in Swedish, it'd be horrible.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Hats off to these guys for real lyrics.
Give these guys credit, you know. But one of the things that you hear in there, and I think Mark, you mentioned it before about Nicky's drum style. He's very like loose and sloppy in a lot of things, and I don't know if that's the punk kind of element
I think
coming out.
Some of it has to do with
the weird recording, right?
Yeah, that Skogsberg. He was like, I'm not gonna be able to mic this kit with real drums.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to use like some digital drums, some drum pads for some of this.
Is that where Nicky was saying it felt like he was hitting concrete? Because
there's no, like with a drum head, you've got response. You hit it with a stick, the stick kicks back to some degree. With a pad, it's like thick rubber.
Yeah,
it just absorbs it. So it's a totally different, like,
changed your rhythm.
Yeah, and playing, I've played both electronic kits and live kits. It's totally different experience, and especially when you've got
hot sticks. Just remember those crappy things.
Oh God, those are just the sticks that made noise.
Yeah.
But no, he had all the cymbals were mic'd live, and then the snare drum was mic'd. But then the double kick drum, which the kick drums on an electronic kit, for those who care, is it's not like a vertical member where you're hitting the pedal. Mm-hmm. It's actually the pedal, at least the ones that I've used, it's a pedal that comes all the way down and hits something that's horizontal.
Oh, okay.
So it's a different amount of pressure. It's not, you're not be able to like rock back and forth quite so quick.
So it's hard to train for playing drums in this sort of capacity.
Yeah, it's like learning stick on a big old truck and then getting into a totally different car that has really goofy, like you're going to be sputtering a little bit. But I think the most noticeable thing, because the way it's produced, the kick drum doesn't jump out quite so much as digital drumming. The toms.
Yeah.
It's like there's not enough variation in tone between 3 or 4 times he's using, and it's always just this through it. But it adds a unique sound that, I mean, you can't tell it's electronic drums.
No.
Listening to it, and I was kind of surprised to hear that. I was like, there's something weird about the drums, but there's something weird about the whole production.
Well, and there's just like the muddiness of the whole music. It kind of adds a kind of a unique element. It gives it a punk aesthetic in a way, kind of like a FU. We're not going to clean it up. You know, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's
rawness.
It's not like really well produced, but it's not badly produced. Like everything's captured, but it's captured really oddly.
And of course, people, because of this record, flock to Sunlight Studios with Thomas Skogsberg, and they want the Skogsberg sound, much like people flocked down to Scott Burns and Morrisound in Florida, to get that sort of sound. But in particular on Drowned and then When Life Is Seized, those are 2 tunes where you can really hear Nicky's drums kind of being off a little bit. Mm-hmm. In When Life Is Seized, he's almost like behind the music. He's a little off time, trying to catch up to it.
Yeah, you hear him playing catch up a little bit with some of the fills going a little bit longer than I guess a metronome would say would be correct. But
it works.
But it all works, yeah.
For sure. And then the tune in between, the second tune you heard there, Revel in Flesh, one of the things I wrote down and pointed out, and you kind of confirmed, very much a, pre-Dismember, Carnage, Infestation of Evil vibe to that tune. I mean, just... And some sick grind blasts, just like some of the most like pronounced like Repulsion, like napalm blasts that kind of come.
And actually, I think even more coherent. It's not the Ken Owen style of the kick drum and just the cymbal without doing the snare hit.
Yeah.
But they were full on blasts. I don't think we'd heard. Well, a Morbid Angel or Terrorizer or something.
Yeah, Terrorizer
has been able to capture it, but it wasn't captured that often, so it's kind of an anomaly, I think.
Yep. So it's a kind of a nice mixture. I mean, that's the thing. There's a tone to every song on this, like to the whole record. I mean,
yeah.
Every song has like its own kind of unique personality.
Yeah,
you know? It's maybe not as diverse as say Clandestine. Clandestine feels like a disjointed record. Like it doesn't have a flow through parts of it, but like
Clandestine's more proggy.
It's got a lot more singles almost. Like every song has its own individual movements and different.
And it's more jerky.
Yeah,
like there's a lot of stop-start stuff in Clandestine, and Left Hand Path I think is more of a cohesive, as far as listening experience. It's all there. There's not much jarring.
Yeah,
there. It's just it feels just like an experience listening to the thing.
And I think because I have, and when I say prog, I'm talking King Crimson and some of that, not like Yes and like stuff that happens beyond. But I think because I enjoy a certain type of prog, I think I get into Clandestine more than maybe some people who find that a tough album to sort of like penetrate sometimes,
Yeah, I think it's a transitional record for sure. It's a good record, but it's not. I think they're jumping a little bit ahead of themselves. Like, probably, and the biggest complaint everybody has with that record, not to go onto a Clandestine jag, but is the vocal performance.
Yeah.
That's kind of weak and inconsistent compared to. Something we haven't really talked about yet is LG.
LG, yeah.
Is he's one of the most natural death metal vocalists with his delivery. Nothing's like forced, and he has an incredible range of growls to screams and he's got power behind his voice. Seeing him live,
sure,
he doesn't just do the stuff like cut mic Chris Barnes style. It's coming out right out of his guts,
Yeah, and I remember seeing Entombed live, and he was fantastic. Even when he did like Evil In and some of the older stuff. Just punishing. But yet catchy. Like he's a very listenable death metal vocalist.
You can decipher what he's saying too, which is kind of surprising. Even on the later on stuff, into their later in their career, even though he's maybe like let up on the gruffness a little bit, he's got that. He's just like he's the quintessential Entombed vocalist.
Yep.
And I think it was for me, it felt like a step backwards to not have him on that record, especially after hearing Crawl, which was, I guess, Over Softstrom did vocals on that. It's a closer approximation of what they had on Left Hand Path. Nirvana 2002.
Oh, okay. I couldn't remember if it was Chronic Decay or Nirvana 2002.
And then going from that and seeing LG on a Comacon record, I was like, oh, God, what are they doing? Just like reconcile your differences and get him back
in the
together.
band. Yeah, exactly. It's like Carl with Bolt Thrower. He wasn't part of them, and you'll hear a great. We'll talk more about LG a little bit later, especially on Bitter Loss, which is coming up in the next set of music. But one of the things about the third track we played there, When Life Has Ceased, is at the 2-minute mark. They really capture, and you heard it a little bit in Left Hand Path, but to me they capture that fat groove that is like pronounced in Entombed's kind of finest moments. There is always a groove kind of going on underneath, and there's really nothing like it in death metal. I mean, Dismember has the sound of Entombed, but as we were pointing out, like what Dismember and Carnage did was a little bit more like slicing. It was a little more
razor sharp.
Yeah. It beat you up a little bit more with what they were doing, whereas Entombed always was a warmth.
Yeah, like Entombed, like into a fight or something. Entombed they'd be beating you up, punching you around, but Dismember would be like slicing you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's visceral. I think Dismember's more visceral.
There you go.
And if you want to, I think between those two records, I think
like an Ever-Flowing Stream.
Yeah, like an Ever-Flowing Stream from Dismember, I think is a more, I guess, it reflects more of what the rest of the scene was doing. Yeah. I think that is probably the quintessential, as far if you're talking about being like a benchmark of what other people are up to. Left Hand Path is an anomaly. It's its own thing. Nobody ever came close to that in the scene, as far as I'm concerned. And I think like an Ever-Flowing Stream is an equal record.
Yeah,
it's just it's two sides of the same coin, I guess.
Sure. And and you've obviously, if you go back to our early origins, I think show number 3 was Dismember, 2 or 3 or something like that.
I think 2 was Edge of Sanity. I think 3 was Dismember, and
Immortal
or something.
Yeah,
Immortal.
The old days, the glory days. But so anyways, if you want to go back for comparison's sake. And then the last 2 we played, they're Supposed to Rot, just short but sweet, whenever I hear that opening riff, it sounds like a hyper distorted, like Megadeth riff or something. Like it's a weird.
I can understand, but I can't say totally.
Yeah,
about that.
it's weird. I think it's just the way I heard this record the first time. It was the first thing that kind of bounced out.
Oh, and I think Supposed to Rot is another, to bring up LG's vocals again. Like, he was doing vocal melodies and patterns that weren't used that much. It wasn't just the rapid fire crap that we'd heard, for the, Carlson did a lot, or like it was actually complementing the music and making it a better piece of music. It wasn't just there to be vocals.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a rarity at this point, because even like Bolt Thrower doesn't have the most dynamic vocal delivery. I think out of any of those early bands, probably Carcass had the most dynamic vocal delivery as far as vocal patterns.
Yeah. Plus there were 2 guys kind of challenging each other.
But even like the cadence of how they would scream or whatever it seemed to be like kind of head and shoulders above a lot of their contemporaries.
For sure. But yeah, you do hear that, and to me, like Supposed to Rot sounds like Rain and Blood meeting Repulsion or something. It's got some Slayer dive bombs,
it's
but
2
it's
minutes
just like
balls out song. Yeah, basically. I'm talking about burying a body in the fruit cellar. I mean,
that was Evil Dead. That too. It's Evil Dead. Evil Dead lyrics.
I think Nicky wrote that one. He said, "Yeah, it's totally just Evil Dead."
He's a horror movie guy. But anyways, moving into the kind of next big set of music here. Obviously, we're sticking with the record, and we're getting kind of the second half of it. This song right here, But Life Goes On, not only is it sort of the tipping point of the second half of the record, this is an old Nihilist tune. Mm-hmm. A lot of these are old Nihilist tunes, but this one had been around for a little bit.
Well, this one was originally 89. It was on the But Life Goes On demo.
Yeah. So it was an old kind of Entombed Nihilist tune from their early demo days and stuff. And to me, this is, I say it's the quintessential sort of like Entombed song. Left Hand Path is to some extent because of its epicness, but just if I was to select like a 3-minute slice and say this is what an average kind of Entombed song of this era sounds like, to me this has like all the elements, kind of the death and roll, the punk, the Repulsion, the Autopsy, soulful leads. It's got it all kind of captured.
I think actually, between But Life Goes On and Bitter Loss, those two, I mean, they're
Bitter Loss is the best vocal performance of LG, I think, on this record. So too. And a great bass breakdown. For not having a bassist, they kind of throw in a kind of a
because they'd never played bass before.
It's kind of like a hammer smash face kind of like kind of thing going on. So we got But Life Goes On, Bitter Loss, Morbid Devourment, and Abnormally Deceased. Any thoughts on some of these other 3 tunes, or talk about them when we come back?
We can talk about them when we get back. We've been rattling on long enough here. So
sounds good. So enjoy But Life Goes On from Left Hand Path.
But my soul is lonely anywhere.
just heard Abnormally Deceased, Morbid Devourment, Bitter Loss,
and But Life Goes On.
Not the TV show with Corky.
No, not at all. And in particular, those first two songs, we already talked about But Life Goes On a little bit as being kind of quintessential, but Bitter Loss is another kind of high water mark, I think, for this record. It's one of the better songs, I think, as a single piece of music.
Well, it's one that actually has some bass is up in the mix. With the first, the opening couple lines, you get bass and you get the little breakdown. And we've got another thing that Entombed ends up using ad nauseum is the string sliding the pick, up the neck kind of deal that they wasn't used a ton outside of like Van Halen, and you didn't hear it as much as
because you wouldn't be able to hear it in the midst of most death metal songs. That little, because everything else in most death metal songs there's so much happening.
So dense.
Yeah, so dense that you couldn't hear those little. They're moments.
like little accents that really kind of, I think, made them stand out from their peers.
For sure. And then especially at the end of Bitter Loss, like LG kind of like puts on his like, he just goes to like the next level, with,
like his throat's gonna be torn out.
I mean, he just keeps like repeating the same line and kind of ups the ante each time, and so it's a nice build there. And then Morbid Devourment, one of the longer tunes alongside the title track on the record. And, you kind of noticed a couple things that were going on in this song.
As far as there's almost like a thrash kind of feel to it, but the riffing style is almost what you end up seeing them doing later on Wolverine Blues to, it's basically
kind of death and roll type thing, or
where it's more, they're not doing the tremolo stuff, they're not doing the crust sound, it's kind of more like their own hybrid of the two, more of like the death and roll kind of. I think maybe the roots of that kind of, maybe I can see that kind of starting to form in songs like this.
And I could hear bits and pieces of like like Demon and Eve Master and some of those kind of just standard sounding tunes on that record, Wolverine Blues and other things. So, and then Abnormally Deceased, one of the more kind of faster, aggressive songs on the whole record, and kind of a good one to kind of close things out.
It's almost a precursor to like Dusk.
Yeah.
That was just, it wasn't a blast, but just a kind of attack, and the whole song kind of has that staccato rhythm to it, and it's one of the more punkier sounding tracks. I think.
And that first opening 40 seconds is sort of like the great headbanging kind of part of the whole record. I mean, it's really just pound your head and get after it. Just very aggressive. And I was saying to you that unfortunately I even listened to Morbid Devourment, Abnormally Deceased, and then the song that we're going to kind of close things out with, Truth Beyond, as much, because I think at a certain point I would get to Bitter Loss, and it was one of my favorite songs, and be like completely satisfied having heard those first 7 songs. So I know those first 7 songs really well, but these last 3, I don't have as much of a personal attachment to.
Yeah, it's like not cuddling after sex or something.
I know, it's weird. So I need to buddy up with these last 3 songs a little bit more.
Well, I think back when I first got this record, it was when, CDs were premium, like $18 or whatever, so I could only maybe get like, one a week if I was lucky.
So
I digested the hell out of the stuff.
You nestled up to that CD quite a bit, I imagine.
Yeah. So it was, it's like how it is now where I can listen to CDs, like if I get a new disc, like I'll listen to it upwards of 15 to 20, if it's good, 15 to 20 times, and then put it away for a little while, and if it's good enough, I can keep revisiting it over and over again.
Out and stuff. See, I'm the kind of person that gets through certain CDs, and I might not ever listen to the live or bonus tracks on a CD because I just don't make it that far. Oh, and my attention span is so. But
you're the kind of guy that will also recognize standout tracks and remember the names. I remember like the feel of the record. But ask me a title of a track and I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah. It's the DJ part of me, from back in the radio days of you could just name a record and ask me what songs,
track 7.
what songs we should play. The second and the fourth one are the most dynamic ones.
And to this day, a lot of your CDs still have little pieces of paper that say track 1, track 3 inside of it.
This one doesn't. Look, but it is pretty funny the old days. So, but kind of a neat little John Tardy scream at the end. That's what I called it. I wouldn't say most people would pick up on that, but higher register kind of
the slightly Down syndrome size scream.
The Corky.
Yeah.
Going back to another Corky reference that you made earlier, but life goes on.
And a Tardy reference as well.
Yes.
For those guys got brutally beat up in high school, but hey.
Wow. Okay. Anyways, what are your closing thoughts on the record before we kind of wrap things up here with The Truth Beyond? And
but I think this one is kind of obvious as it's like a big, milestone benchmark in the scene. It still holds up to repeat listens. Like, I've probably listened to this thing a couple hundred times at least. I've listened to this record, and every time I go back to it, I'm still hearing a little bit something else that was there.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly dense record, and it's really one of the few of that era, I think, that you can not necessarily that era, but of Swedish death metal that you can repeat listen so many times and you're still pulling new stuff out of it. I got the record in 1990, and here it is 19 years later. God, I feel like an old piece of crap. Hey, hey, it's my original CD too.
Yeah.
Still mint shape.
Yeah.
But 19 years after the fact, it's still as engaging as it was when I first listened to it. I think that's kind of a testament to it.
Yeah. And I think for those of you that are kind of fascinated with this era of stuff, we keep kind of, flaunting this, but you definitely got to go out and get the Earache Swedish Death Metal book.
It's cheap.
Gives the whole
I spent
feel.
$40 on this bastard.
Yeah.
And it's totally worth $40. I've seen it as low as $15. It's highway 500 pages. It's like the size of a phone book. It's got, even if you don't want to read all the stuff, it's got a hell of a glossary in it. Like, oh crap, I heard about Morbid. Who are they? Flip to the index in the back. Oh, Morbid did this, and this. They're a great band.
Them. Yeah. And or Choosing Death, which has a pretty good chapter on the Swedish death metal scene and Entombed and stuff by Albert, who's part of Decibel, the editor in chief. Or you can read more in depthly than what we kind of got into. We gave you a couple of highlights from the Decibel Hall of Fame interview that's in the Precious Metal thing. So,
which I definitely seek that out as well.
It's really cool in a weird way, and again, it makes, I think, us feel old in a certain sense that so much documentation of this era of like the late 80s, early 90s kind of extreme metal scene is starting to be like kind of captured and documented. And
20 years after the fact, I guess that's how long it takes. What do you think, history teacher? When is it usually when people get the most accurate rendition of what happens, when they're right there after the fact?
I don't know. I was pretty impressed with all the accuracy of the Michael Jackson reporting immediately upon death. I'm just kidding.
Luckily, to go on a little brief jag, luckily I don't have television at all. I have not seen any Michael Jackson coverage except for I listened to the No Agenda podcast, which is a couple kind of crackpot guys talking about conspiracy theory type stuff, but they're very entertaining and they're well informed. And actually one of them is Adam Curry, who used to be a VJ on MTV. The other guy's a tech journalist who's in his 60s.
Yeah, I remember Adam Curry.
And
blonde, beautiful hair.
Oh yeah, he totally looked, like Kip Winger kind of looking dude, or David Coverdale or something. Yeah. But he was interviewed, since he was a VJ at MTV back in the day. They interviewed him about Michael Jackson's death, and they just basically wanted a puff piece about him, like, tell us a great experience you had them. Yeah. He was like, isn't it interesting that back, he was scheduled for all these British tours. That's going to be this huge, European thing where obviously you'd have to have insurance, and to get insurance for something like that, you'd have to have a physical, and do these kind of shows, you'd have to be in great shape. I think you guys should be looking into why he wasn't murdered. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, that's priceless.
That's all I've heard about the coverage. I've heard it's been exhaustive.
The thing that I heard on NPR actually this week, because when we're recording this, you won't hear this until way after the fact. But Walter Cronkite, probably the most famous and probably most highly respected TV news journalist that's ever existed, just passed away. And he, they said when Elvis died in '77, he was doing the CBS News. They didn't even get to Elvis's death until like after the second or third commercial. And Elvis is the king of rock, right? It just shows where our priorities have shifted in the world.
There's all kinds of, I'm not going to go into the conspiracy theorist crap, but there's all kinds of other incredibly important stuff going through Congress right now that's not even being talked about on the news.
How about the Iraqi troops pulling out, or U.S. troops pulling out of Iraq during the week of Michael Jackson's death and stuff? So.
Well, and putting contracted mercenaries in there?
Absolutely.
Hey, news is what you make of it.
All I could say is I have a really good story to tell my grandkids one day is, if they even give two craps about Michael Jackson.
If the world still exists.
Yeah, exactly. I was in Budapest when I heard that Michael Jackson died. So I was in a Hungarian hotel. Yes.
Wow.
Yes, I was. Very metal of me, right? Central Europe and all. So.
Totally.
But anyways.
See, that all relates to death. It comes back to death metal.
Absolutely.
But yeah, this is kind of the weird time where journalism is actually hitting death metal, and seeing it as a viable.
It's been around now for 20 plus years, 25 years, going back to the early Death, Possessed kind of stuff.
Yeah, it depends on where you want to draw, but it's been there long enough to not, people know it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think this is definitely, Left Hand Path is definitely one of the kind of like, cornerstones, keystone, whatever the hell analogy you want to make out of it. One of the big albums of the time that I think it gets decent coverage, but it's not as exhaustive as I want it to be.
Yeah. And especially once you've...
I want a 33 and a third book on it, something like that.
Yeah, which you probably won't get, at least maybe not in this cycle, maybe 10 years from now.
Probably not. Actually, in the next 5 years, we'll have enough crap that I can accumulate all that together into one.
There you go. We'll be writing the
piece.
33rd and the 3rd books and stuff. So it's a neat gateway into the European metal scene. I mean, it's not the only one, but it's definitely one of the few quintessential ones that you have to sort of walk through in order to totally see what Europe was all about,
And it was, as far as like people that were not into death metal got into this record too, just for its pure sonic value.
And the punk elements, I think, that are there, the attitude behind it.
There's that crossover that Entombed...
You could be a big Stooges fan and like the noisy kind of violence and kind of attitude of the record.
Yeah, it's almost how like, punks gave Motorhead a free pass. Yeah. And like,
and Slayer.
Indie people, they for some reason give Entombed a pass.
Yeah.
Who knows what it is?
Carcass sometimes gets a pass as well,
and the grind stuff.
Their street cred value. So it helps having the John Peel factor with some of that stuff too.
Oh, totally.
Giving it indie cred, but
maybe we can be the John Peel to a young generation of children listening to this in post-apocalyptic United States America.
Exactly. We'll call it Radio 5 from America. We'll broadcast.
Really? We just need
basement.
We can put all this crap on a flash drive. We'll bury it in a time capsule, and we'll see.
We could be like Christian Slater and pump up the volume and just be a mobile radio, spreading the word and message to the whole.
It's going out in the airwaves as we speak.
It's true. But anyways, enough jibber jab from us. We'll kind of let you get out of here with The Truth Beyond, and let us know what you thought. If again, Mark, you said that people were kind of pumped about this show. You had gotten a little bit of early feedback.
People have asked quite a bit about when the hell are you going to do an Entombed show?
But they said they didn't know a lot about Entombed, but they're
like familiar with, I guess, or they liked a lot of the music, but they didn't know history, and I guess we touched on a little bit of that. But this was just kind of surrounding this record. We could have done an entire half-hour pod or probably 2-hour podcast about, okay, first Johnny went to this band, then he went to this band. I mean, it's a very incestuous kind of background for the Swedish scene. So I think this was a good smattering of Entombed.
Just a nice introduction. We'll probably come back to Entombed and the stuff they do afterwards because it's of great value as well. It's just this is a particularly special record that needs a sort of bright light shined on it, a little bit. And but let us know what you thought. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Give us the feedback on iTunes.
Reviews are very much appreciated.
Yeah, we appreciate that. Or visit the website.
Yeah, requiempodcast.com, where we'll have links to where you can buy these records,
and maybe even some of the book links.
Sure. There'll be for Swedish Metal, for Choosing Death, and for Precious Metal, we'll have those in our affiliate link. If you buy them from our affiliate links, we get a little bit of kickback, which helps with the costs that are incurred by doing the show. And we always end up buying extra CDs every show. I end up I don't have that last 2 Creator CDs, so we spend more money than we make on the show.
All that kind of stuff too. So but enjoy The Truth Beyond. This is not a whole lot to say about this. It's really a reaffirmation of a lot of the themes of the record. It's got the slow groove part,
and I think outside of it's a good closing track. Outside of the US version has the 2 bonus tracks,
but this is what the closing track should be.
And a little bit of trivia. The Truth Beyond is also a live CD that I think came out. It was a live bootleg Entombed CD that we got super excited about. It had great production values as far as the cover and everything was concerned. It sounded like ass.
Really?
But Chris still has it in his collection. Way worse than Monkey Puss.
And that didn't sound so good.
It was okay. Yeah. That sounds great compared to this.
Wow, that's pretty awful. But do pay attention to the closing moments of this song because you get a sinister moment from LG. That's all I'll say. So enjoy the Truth Beyond from Entombed's Left Hand Path for the Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark. Stay curious.
Oh.